we get together to discuss and to exchange ideas on a topic of a common interest, right? So that topic of common interest has been, technology impact, especially in Africa, and focusing on AI, right? And we've had a number of discussions about, first of all, the first big webinar was to show the importance of AI and why it was so important for Africa to have a voice in the AI discussion. Last month, we had a session on the compute portion, and I think it was a very, very rich and insightful debate. Just to give you some at the end of this, there was a number of exchanges that has happened, number of ideas, and now even some projects that where people were working on projects, but maybe it wasn't as open as it is now. And we're starting to surface some of these data center projects that are being worked on the continent. So I think there's movement happening, and it might make sense to share some of these ideas a little bit more. But I think last time what we also agreed was that if we come to talk together and we exchange ideas, it will be good to take it beyond just the exchange and to take action from it. And an action from it would means that we have to get to get some papers, to get a position, to engage other stakeholders, and progressively to see how, as a platform, we can be more active and more impactful. Okay, so last time we spoke about the processing. Today we're going to be speaking about the data itself. Okay, and try to really dig in deeper in the data discussion and understand, what is our position for data. What are the key questions, the key topic that we need to be aware of, and get some ideas about how that comes together to drive the AI agenda, right? We need to make a link to the previous topic just to set the scene. I think we had 3 pillars that we identified in the first session. You have the compute, which is the processing power that we have with the data centers and things like that. You have the data itself, which is the fuel, as I used to say, that is fueling the engine. And then you have the talent, which is the people. Okay, and supporting that, you have the regulation. And then you have the capital, the investment, okay? So we spoke about processing last time. Today, we're going to be diving more into talent. Into data. And then the next session will be into talent, okay? What we will do differently is, as you know already, we're not coming together to, pitch what this is the answer, give the answer. No, I don't think, that's the objectives that we're pursuing. Our key objective is to come and exchange ideas, raise questions, find options and potential action items, and reach each other, right, of this discussion. And hopefully that will lead us to take even more actions, okay? So we will talk about the data. We'll set up the problem statement, and we have 5 questions that we need to answer. And then for each of the questions, we'll try to share as much as possible. You can either react by raising your hand and contributing, or just reacting by listening. It's fine as well. And at the end of each question, we'll come out with maybe 2 or 3 big ideas that we want to keep in our mind in the final report. And at the end of the 5 questions, hopefully we would have covered the key topic. Okay. Just for those who are joining us for the first time, what is Africa's Code? Okay. So Africa's Code is a platform that is bringing together like-minded people who are passionate about technology and how technology can drive development for Africa, right? And we have different technologies that we're looking at. I think right now, the big focus is on AI. And, and I think the key question is, by coming together, one, how do we learn more about AI? That's important. How do we learn more? Okay. Two, as we learn more, how do we maybe create more synergies and maybe come together as a movement, as a platform to start impacting how the discussions and the ideas that are being used around the continent. And hopefully, I'm sure some project can come out of it. It's not out of a discussion. Some projects can emerge from it, and hopefully we can have a better impact. But I think coming together as a group, as a team, as a team, as a platform is a very powerful thing that is helpful. Okay, good. So that is Africa. So we'll continue to engage on the webinar, on other forums, on different topic, but with the same aim of bringing like-minded people together to advance the discussion regarding technology deployment and its impact in Africa. Good. Now we come back to the data. The data question is an important one, okay? Because last time, we were talking about the processing power, the data center and everything that we needed to use that data center. But the data center is only as useful as you have data that comes in. Okay, so where is the data and where is the African data, and how impactful is that African data in defining the future of Africa? And there are a few realities, right? And it's there. I think you can read it. These are just introductory points, right? I think Africa data is processed outside of Africa. That we know. And I think last time we spoke about that specifically, okay? I think it's also clear that African realities are not represented enough in the global data set. That is also very, very clear. I think one example was, given in different, but even if you look at your facial recognition, because the facial recognition algorithm was written based on the rules or the pictures that existed in data, and most of the pictures that existed were more Western type of data, the accuracy of the facial recognition of an African face is lower than what you would expect from a European face, for example. Okay, so these are just elements, but let's go beyond that. Once you start putting algorithm to define the trustworthiness, for example, of an individual. Okay, there are certain behavior that did not trust in people. And depending on where you are in the world, it might be different. Even the handshake, the way you do the handshake in Africa, where you can actually build trust, would be very different from what is expected as a handshake in Asia, for example. So if all the data that we have is based on this external data, the algorithm that will define this trustworthiness will just be trusting the people who've been represented. Okay, and you can expand in other codes. So the importance of having a representation of African data set is extremely important. Okay, and then once you have that, I think the whole infrastructure, the policy, and the thing which needs to be discussed. But the reality is, it's very fragmented today, right? Every country is having its own AI policy. Every country is having its own data protection policy. It's to be seen how effective that can be and how that can actually be reinforced, right? And then, you have the fact that because all this data is going out, we are not really profiting from the data that is produced on the continent. And the danger is there, right? So this is where, if we are not careful, we find ourselves in a situation again where the raw data, this time is actually data, it's not raw material. Our raw data is going out and coming back in the refined data insight and sold maybe 100 times more. So the same industrial discussion that is being put now into the AI space. So I think it's important that we, are aware of these questions and that we start thinking about what type of answers can come in. So we have 5 points that we will discuss today, and I think I will be more listening than talking myself. So the first one, we'll spend some time on the data sovereignty and the localization. There are questions that we'll be asking there and we share. We'll talk about the data governance and how, as a continent, we can align. We'll talk about the Africa dataset and how we can ensure global representation. We'll talk about the open data ecosystem as well and how we can make it that more ethical. And last but not the least, we'll finish with the privacy and protection. Okay. For each of these, we'll try to spend no more than 10 minutes. And we'll start by asking the main question and then get input as we did last time, and then move on to the next topic. Okay. Deal? We all set?
Deal.
Great. So let's start. We start with a corny question about data sovereignty and data localization. Okay, and that was and it's a link to the previous discussion that we have had, right? Last time, I think we were very clear that we need to have some data centers across the continent, and I believe you guys remember the image of the airplane, and we need to own the airport and not maybe manufacture the airplane, things like that, right? But now I think the question is, beyond this infrastructure element, are there other considerations that we should think about to ensure the data sovereignty and the localization of the data in Africa? So what levers can we use to drive that engagement? Okay, so I think it's an open question, but we will be able to get some insight on that. We did run a survey, and that's what is coming out of the survey, for example, is that everybody is aware and conscious that data sovereignty is extremely, extremely important. Okay, but not many people have thoughts and ideas about what needs to happen beyond just putting a data center in the country. So beyond just putting a data center in the country, is there anything that can be considered to ensure that we have our data sovereignty? So let me open up the floor from here. And Karim, please go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Naval. So yeah, it's interesting. This question is very interesting because there's the theoretical aspect of it, and then there's the reality on the ground. You look at China, for example. China forbids the export of any AI-generated data. They are very keen on keeping that, within their borders and within their data centers, physically. But then again, how do you enforce this? For every law, you have to be able to enforce. To be able to enforce, you have to be able to at least do audits. So now you're looking at having government entities that develop the skill set to understand how this works and how this can be implemented, enforced, and if there are, infractions, take the necessary steps. So I think there's a legal framework that needs to be set up, by in this case would be the government's reach, because this has to do with the sovereignty of the data. And then it's also about establishing clear lines of, data centers exchange data, because for efficiencies and whatnot. You look at some of the companies that are operating data centers in South Africa and Kenya, these are one of the same. And so maybe for load balancing reasons, they need to be able to, transfer some of the compute from one data center in one country to another. We see it with Amazon when we use Amazon Web Services, especially if you want to do redundant solutions from an architecting standpoint, you're going to think about using, a couple of different data centers so that if one goes down, the other one is still up and running. So I think there's a lot of gray in this question, in my opinion. And I just wanted to put it out there, maybe as a starter, what other people may think, because my angle is this is a very complex, piece of the machinery, and one I think that the leaders of AI today out there are able to use to their advantage because governments are really slow to catch up and adapt.
Thank you. Thank you, Karim. And I think, I'm picking up your point about the fact that it's gray, and the fact that even if there are rules, enforcing them becomes extremely challenging, right? But at the same time, I think is the recognition that it is something to be aware of, and it is something that those who believe themselves as leaders of AI on the African continent needs to cope with and maybe lead the direction to see how that can be influenced. So, yeah. But I think, that's a very good point. Miles?
Yeah, thanks everyone. Nice to see everyone again. I think there's a couple of things. I mean, it's okay for us to sit back and say, yes, we need to bring data into the African content, and yes, we need to build our own data center. But what are going to be the drivers of those decisions? And I think if I look at it from a government perspective, there's people. The communities in Africa are going to be continuously pushing government to say we need to have more capability in Africa. We shouldn't have so much offshoring, and it's not necessarily about owning all of that, but most probably partnering with the big guys like AWS, etc. So the government needs to be one of the big drivers. Then the community is going to be a driver. So Africa has a very young population, and I think 43% of them are using mobile phones now, which is equating to, let's say, 500 million people that are using mobile phones, and a lot of them are going to access, AI and technology from that. So they're going to be driving the push towards being able to use those tools a lot more effectively. So there's going to be a community push. But I think it always also comes down to economics at the end of the day. If you think about it coming from a data perspective, three of the big growth areas in AI in Africa is your fintechs, your health areas, your healthcare, and your agriculture. So AI is able to help hugely in credit risk assessment in the fintechs. It's able to, in the healthcare sector, to help people reach, communities that are right out there, nowhere near hospitals. And then from an agri perspective, you're seeing, that you're able to, take a picture of a plant and say, is this diseased or not? So those are three really big areas that, from an economic perspective, is going to drive organizations to say, here's some huge opportunities in Africa from a AI perspective. And then to get those to actually work, you're going to need African data. You're going to need African healthcare data. You're going to need African financial data. You're going to need African agriculture data. So I think those are some of the things that are going to drive us towards, having data coming into an African perspective rather than us just, and I'm not saying that's what we're saying, but it needs to be driven by government, by society, and by economics at the end of the day.
Thank you, Miles. And Miles, I think especially your last point is very interesting about the fact that the data itself, whether it's a healthcare data, whether it's a financial data, whether it's agricultural data, that data itself represents an African reality. And whether this is processed in Africa or outside of Africa, it doesn't remove the Africanity of this data, because the reality that this data carries is an African data, right? So that's one of the key things that you saying, right? That's what I'm hearing.
No, that is, but I think also because people will see that there's commercial opportunities within that, and it would be better to host that data in Africa.
Yeah,
And
than to
of
get
course,
it.
it'll be used globally as well. But I think once we start seeing that commerciality of these types of scenarios, we'll start seeing more investment into data centers and AI, data, machine learning and all of that type of stuff in an African context.
Yeah, yeah. I think we'll talk about that in one of the questions. Let's keep that in mind, because I think the real question that I have for me is, this data set, agri data sets, healthcare data sets, where are these? I mean, are these data actually being captured now? Right? It's happening certainly, but is it being captured now? So let's keep that. We'll come back to that question when we look at the quality of the Africa data set itself. Okay. I have Leye and Serge. So Leye first.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah,
welcome back.
Thank you very much. Just a statement is in the UK you have what you call data providers. I went to a session whereby we had all these data providers, and data providers they aggregate data. So basically, if we want to keep data in Africa, we need to start setting up data providers who would, although the data providers have to be, they have to obviously operate under data protection laws. So it's important that they work around data protection laws. But the data providers have a way of collecting data. It's amazing. I went to a session where you had this data provider that has all the bank data in the UK. They have all the bank data, all the transactions that, even though we have GDPR, the UK has GDPR and has all these data laws, there's certain type of data that the data providers are able to acquire, they're able to buy, and they're able to keep, and they're able to sell. So we need to look at the business of the data provider within the African context. What type of data providers exist in the local African market? What kind of, because what will happen is that the banks are very key here as well. The banks and the telcos are very key. They're very key because they carry a lot of data. So these data providers cannot function without coming into some sort of deals with the banks and the telcos and the governments that carry most of the data. And obviously, and when we're talking about data, they're not really, it's just basic data, not confidential data that will breach data protection laws, but that ecosystem of creating data providers in obviously linking up to the banks and to the telcos and to the governments is a way to look at localizing data and obviously keeping it in the African continent. So it's just an idea that I just wanted to put out there.
Thank you, Ale. And actually, it's a very. Does anybody know of anyone who could be considered as a data aggregator or data exchange or data provider on the continent now, at the continental scale?
I would consider the telcos big
Yeah,
data
but
aggregators?
are they data aggregators? Because they're
You mean like
using
fintechs
the business
specifically?
data, right?
So
if I look
there's
at
this company. There's this company that is coming to Africa. I don't know if they're based in Africa. I believe the headquarters in London, but they operate in Africa. I believe ECOWAS gave the mandate to actually collect credit data and financial data from banks. I think that the name is Credit Volo, if I'm not mistaken. Credit Info. Credit Info. Credit Info.
Yeah.
Exactly. So they're like a new credit bureau that's forming inside of Africa, starting with the West Coast. And they're the only example that I know. And I know of them because, obviously I'm always scanning the environment for competition. And, they're a competitor of my company right now.
Yeah. Because I think what Lee is talking about in my mind is goes beyond that because
Yeah.
what we have data aggregators for specific sector, right? For specific sector, but somebody who can actually be a data exchange. The only one that I've heard of was a South African startup, Omniscient. They're based in Joburg. I don't know how far. I mean, I was in touch with them 2 years ago. I don't know how far they went into the process, but they were looking at raising, fund to become a data aggregator. But I think it's a very, very interesting point about the fact that maybe if we want to really make sure that all this data is available, the value chain needs to be able to create these aggregators, and it needs to be economically viable as a business model. And if they really understand, then they can actually empower a lot of the stakeholders in the ecosystem. So I think it's a very interesting perspective. Serge, is that you made your point, or you want to add something?
I wanted to add something because
Yeah, please go ahead.
I like where this conversation is going as a follow-up from the compute conversation. And I want to take even a further step back when it comes to data, right? Because I think the point that you made at the beginning of the conversation around data being the fuel is a little bit understated, right? Like data being the fuel is essentially the most important thing in this whole AI thing, right? We all know about garbage in, garbage out. So the quality of the data that goes in equates the quality of the solutions that come out. And for us to really hone in on data, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is something similar to GDPR, right? Like from a policy standpoint, because that lays down the guardrails where all of the stakeholders in the ecosystem know where they can play, right? And it takes us back to what the point that I think Karim made first around government having a responsibility to kind of set these boundaries, and them also understanding the importance of the data and what it means to their ecosystem, right? And so I'll take an example of, for instance, the Ivory Coast. We recently started a campaign to digitize identities at the national level, right? Like we're revamping our national ID cards, and we're trying to catch up to systems like the Western world by instituting unique identifier numbers to every individual so that we can have unique identities. And it's called a national identification number. And it's something that is now being pushed out, right? So think about it as the SIN number in Canada, or the social security number in the United States, or the CPF in Brazil, right? It's a unique identifier that is tied to you for your entire life, that we will be able to aggregate all sorts of data, that belong to that individual, whether it's education, whether it's health data, whether it's financial data, right? Like all kinds of data can be attributed to an individual. And that's kind of the foundation, right? And then we get into the privacy laws, right? The protection that we're providing to individuals depending on the type of data, right? And the reasoning behind that is we're not going to treat social media data, right, like where you're sharing jokes with your friends, with the same level of depth that we would treat financial data, where you're sending information about your mortgage payment, for instance, or your credit card balance, right? And so we need to start establishing these scales and these authorizations for the different players so that they understand where they're playing, and what are the guardrails, that they can't cross. And so all of that, I think, laying that as a foundation will then help drive the ecosystem of those data aggregators that we're talking about, right? And I say all of that from the vantage point of the company that I serve right now. Equifax is essentially a data company. We are a data aggregator, right? Like, we collect financial and credit data from everywhere. Now, we have this remit by law, right? And it was only because the United States government decided that, yes, we're going to start compiling these databases so we can create a credit business in this country, that, we are in existence, right? And fast forward, we now have multiple competitors. There are more actors in that space. But I just wanted to kind of just stop here, right? Like, I think from a data standpoint, the foundation around the data, the policy, is super duper important, because I feel like that's the precursor that leads to everything else that's going to happen in terms of development and opportunities for businesses and entrepreneurs.
Thank you very much, Serge. And I think that's a very good segue, because we'll talk about the policy that should be surrounding this data, because that's a very big point. But I think what I'm also hearing there, which I believe is also something to keep in mind, is the fact that there's a fundamental question about do the governments, especially our African government, do they understand really the importance of the data that is available? And I think there's a very strong education that might need to happen in some. I'm saying some do. I'm sure some do. I'm not sure everybody does. And it's important. I mean, it's difficult to police what you don't really understand.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll have in the
Absolutely.
forum some people who might come with a little bit better understanding from the government perspective. And I think once we get into the policy discussion, we can get into that perspective. It would be great to see that perspective coming through. Okay, let's move on a little bit to the second question, because we've exhausted. I mean, we spent a lot of time on the data, and that really comes down now to this governance process, right? So the governance process that we currently have is fragmented in its nature. And that's not only data, it's really everything on our continent that is really fragmented because of the size of our countries, right? So there is a question that if we are thinking scale and opportunity in data, we made the point in the last session that we don't need to have every country having its own data center, because it's counterproductive, right?
Exactly.
So if that's the case, so from a continental or a regional perspective, should we try to, are there initiatives to harmonize this data policies, right? This data governance, this data regulation, okay? I know that the AU has, has set up some rules, but some principles. AFCA is pushing for some harmonization. So I think I'm aware of these two bodies as trying to create some coordination among the countries. But other than that, I think it seems more like every country going on its own. How much information do we have in that, and what's the general perception about the direction that this should take? Karim, I know this is a topic of yours. You're gonna jump on it. So go ahead.
Well, I like to go back to the root of these things, right? Which is the GPAI. And to me, what really strikes me, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the only African nation that recently joined was Senegal. But if you look, GPAI has really set the blueprint on how to go about these types of issues we're trying to discuss. I'm not saying that we need to just take what GPAI has done, but I think we need to participate as nations in that, because it is, to me, the first and foremost, partnership, in terms of how to use AI, how to put it to good use, because it focuses on, data governance, it focuses on, innovation, and responsible use of AI. So I think it would be important because it would allow us as individual African nations to understand where the world is going with AI. So that would be one, because if we were to just focus on our own continent, I think we might miss where the rest of the world is headed. So to me, being more involved in GPAI is key. And then I would say, like you said, we have something, I forgot what it's called. It's an index. I think it's the Kala index that's out there to measure the readiness, if you will, of various nations when it comes to using AI. I think, we have some nations in AI that are very at the forefront, but still lagging behind when it comes to the rest of the, more advanced AI world. But, we have South Africa, we have Kenya, we have Ghana, we have Tunisia, we have Senegal, we have some countries that are really ahead. And I think it would behoove these countries' governments to try to also help out regionally the countries that are just not there yet. And like you said, because we want to be able to, use the cross-border, not everybody has to build their own data center. There's already a lot of money being spent in South Africa and Kenya for that, for example. And then there's also great initiatives on the continent for expanding fiber optic networks to reach, the majority, if not all of the countries that are out there. So the idea to me would be, harmonizing data governance. It starts obviously with between, the host African nations, but also I think being very involved in what's going on and maybe even partnering with some countries out there. China, for example, as I forgot what the name of that initiative is. They have, and it's not huge, but it's a start. They decided that they were going to help. And I know this is going to be a different topic in Valai, but it's more on the talent side. But they're investing money to help, develop talent on the African continent. Now, whether it's for future purposes of having these African talents be drained out, who knows? But that's my thinking on this. Is let's be global as well as Pan-African as well as regional.
I love it. I think you're touching key point. However, let me just give you. So I was in the GuiTech in I think it was April or May this year. Okay, and on the AI stage, there were presentation about the progress of AI and everything. And kid me not, right? We had Morocco that came in, presented the national AI policy for African dominance, right? We had Tunisia presented exactly the same, I mean, with some nuances about how they're going to be dominating the AI space and be the voice of Africa in AI. Kenya came in, did exactly the same presentation. Nigeria actually didn't come on stage. They created a completely separate stage for Nigeria AI. Right? So my sense is there's a lot of movement, right? And people are very much aware of it. And I completely agree with you that we need to be able to have it, to be involved in the global stage discussion. So we cannot have an AI governance in Africa that is separate, that is completely disjointed from the global governance. But at the same time, I believe that it might make sense to create some regional voices before we get into the global stage, instead of trying to run solo, solo journeys, which I believe seems to be the case now. But that's my perception. So we can maybe look at it. I think Serge, go ahead. And I think I've seen my dear friend Eric also coming in. I think Eric, it'd be great if you still are. It'd be great to have some perspective. Thank you. Yes, Serge, go ahead. Serge?
Sorry, guys. I was here talking on mute. Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. No, I think some very good points made again around governance, and the fact that we don't want to operate in a vacuum, right? We want to harmonize not only across countries, across regions, across the continent, but also across the world, because this AI momentum, right, is global. Totally agree with that. I think I want to go back to a point that I think it was Kareem who made at the introduction around governance, right? It, Governance is one of those things where um, it's a game of whack-a-mole, right? Because you can lay down all of the foundation that you can think ahead of time, but the human nature is that, we're always going to try to find the hole and exploit that hole, right? And it's by discovering where the holes are that you can deploy, right? Appropriate governance to mitigate those risks. And so it's going to be an interesting exercise as these different countries are trying to go at it alone, because I think what they're going to find out really quick is that they're all having the same issues, right? They're all facing the same challenges, whether it's the integrity or fraud or misuse or misappropriation of the data to do, the wrong things according to the policy that was set up, right? And so it's going to be an evolving conversation on the continent. And one of the things that I like that you mentioned is leveraging, organizations like the AU and the AFPAC that are bringing together, all of the countries at a table. And the if these guys could start having, roundtable discussions specifically around AI and AI governance, right? I think the similar to what we're doing here at Africa Squad, I think the amount of ideas and the energy and the momentum that could come out of that would be great for setting up an African data governance foundation, right? That is also aligned with the rest of the world. But I agree with all of the points that were made. Going at it alone, it's going to be an experiment, uh, but it's not going to get us, the scale that we need again across Africa.
Yep. And like you said, we've tried that, and then it is what it is. Okay. Ale, I know that you want to make your points quickly. I'm looking at the timeline now. I want to move to the second question, but go ahead, Ale.
Just a very quick one. A lot of data governance, there are two aspects of data governance. There's the regional and there's the African element, but there's also the private sector as well. Because data governance, if you want to start somewhere, you have to start where you have plenty of data. And we look at the banks, we look at telcos, we look at all these organizations sitting on loads and loads of data. And a lot of ecosystems can be built around private sector data, for starters. So regional companies or regional organizations, the eco banks, the MTNs, that Pensers that have all these regional areas, they are key stakeholders to data governance because they are sitting on the data. So they have to manage the data within the various regions that they are operating in, so they understand how those data regulations work. But these guys, I actually think there's fantastic business opportunities to actually work with these data owners to actually aggregate that data and obviously use it in ways that needs to be used. But the point I'm making with data governance, yes, there's the AFCTA or the AU aspect, but there's also the private aspect, regional businesses, EcoBank, UBA, they're all regional businesses. They sit on loads of data, MTNs, Airtel. There's that aspect to look at as well. Just wanted to chip that in. Thank you.
I agree. And I think, if you look at from a business economic point of view, they will have actually more incentive to organize their own data. So that, I think in most of the companies now, at least the ones that I'm aware of, there's a data governance structure in the company that is managing the data quality, the data process, ensuring that there's a strong data protection, and that there are tools now that can be used to drive the business decisions. So most of the companies are doing that now. But to your point, I think it's really internal to the companies and is not yet available for the global consumption. Okay, good. But thank you very much as an input. We're going to go a little bit faster for the other questions because I think some of the questions have already been touched. I think we spoke about Africa dataset. And I think there's already some answers to this question because this is really about the point that you were making earlier, Miles, which is, the data that is being produced in Africa is Africa data because it represents Africa, right? Whether it's healthcare, whether it's agriculture, whether it's the economy, it represents Africa, and whether it's being processed in China, on the moon, or in the US, it's the African reality. Okay, but the question now is, do we have enough of activities capturing this data? Okay, the data are there because whether we like it or not, data exists. But is there enough activities capturing this data? Do we have the quality of data? And is this quality of data being used to bring a much stronger representation of African data in the global stage? Okay, I think there's already part of answers that have been given. I think, Lei mentioned about the fact that, we all agree that in terms of, capturing this data, we don't have a value chain that exists that's strong enough. These data aggregators who can help sometime get the data are not there. The companies, whether you talk about the EcoBank, the MTN, they have the data, but usually it's only internal. They are not yet aggregating them and sharing. There may be some policies that can be considered to bring in more quality African data. But I think, generally speaking, the question really is, how do we make sure that we have a scalable and a large scale Africa data? And how do we make sure that this data is involved in defining the global norm for AI?
That's a loaded question.
Very loaded.
I'll take a stab
Very
at it
loaded.
first, if you guys want. So in terms of data quality, that is very near and dear to me because, again, that is the most important. That's the foundation for any AI system, right? It has to be real data, it has to be accurate data, and it has to keep its integrity in terms of, PII or any type of other associated attributes related to that data. And with that being said, I think the mechanism for us collecting this data right now are very weak. And I'll give you an example. Banks, for that matter, right? In my last couple of trips in Ivory Coast, I had to open bank accounts. The process of opening a bank account, and Bala, that's probably why you're trying to digitize EcoBank right now, right? It is strenuous. You could literally spend 2-3 hours at a branch filling up paperwork. And what you're filling up is essentially the same information over and over and over again on different pieces of paper that you got to sign and paraphrase and initial. And so it is a gruesome process that can be solved instantly with technology and AI, right? Like you could just literally have a form feed that you collect this information once, name, address, date of birth, etc., and you just pre-populate that everywhere else where you need it, right? It can be an enabler of a better consumer experience, but yet and still we're not there yet.
And you see me smiling, right? So
you're right. And I'm picking on banking because
it gives me a job, so
that's right. It's definitely job security. I agree. And I'm picking on bank because I'm a former banker myself, right? So I know this industry very well. But I can extrapolate that to other industries, right? Whether it's education. Think about the amount of data that we have in education on a continent that still relies on pen and paper, right? The digitization of all of these processes, I think, is going to help us with better data quality and better data capture processes. I'm seeing the fintech space booming in that sense, because with mobile money, right, that's really taking over the continent and facilitating transaction across, that industry has a very good mechanism for data capture and making sure that it's in the server, it is protected, and the companies are, I don't know if they're doing a good job of mining that data to draw insights, but it is definitely there, it's captured and it's protected. So the telcos, I think, is a good space where data capture and data integrity is good. But we can go to hospitals too, right? Hospitals, uh, they still rely on pen and paper, and even in the Western world, it is one of the industry that has been the slowest to truly adapt to the newest ways of managing data. And if you remember, in the last decade, health information technology centers, HITs, have kind of taken a life on their own, right? Because it's been the thing to do, digitizing data in the healthcare space. And so I'm going to conclude by saying that we do have some mechanism, but they're very far from being optimized, right? And again, they're so unstructured that there's not a whole lot of standards that we're following, across the board. And so that kind of goes back to the prior point that we made around aligning ourselves with the rest of the world, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? There are already data standards that are out there that can be applied and adapted to the African ecosystems. But I think technology is going to be an enabler of this data capture, because from what I'm seeing right now in Africa, we're not leveraging this data very well. I still see that trove of data that we have just being not compiled and mined accurately, or aggregated, accurately, to Leia's point earlier.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that's well said and well pointed out. I know that timing is going to be a little bit of an issue now, because we have a couple of questions that we need to still answer. And I want to see from the audience, from the participant who has not spoken yet or has not participated, if you have any inputs. I know that Erica is going now, so that would be great. If she's not going yet, she want to make any comment. Danny has made a comment in writing, so that's we'll keep that. Celine, I saw your reactions. Is there any input that you want to make at this stage, Celine?
Thank you. Maybe a quick one before I jump off to the next call. I mean, what we've seen with some of the companies that have been shared, it's also, a lot of the data annotation, which, to go back to like the need of quality of data, is happening on the continent. So there's some skill that are being built here. So it's very interesting to see that those are also for like international data. That's just a comment on some of the companies that I've seen that I'm working with. So definitely to have those data and to be able to go back around, whether it's in agriculture and the data that is used in the finance sector or in education, really big need for digitization and annotation, so that we can have quality data and it can be used on the continent.
Yeah. Do you see any of the linkage of this African data used by global players in building their model?
I mean, the skills, and that's one of the company that I'm working with, is Avala, and they're avoiding to be like that sweatshop, digital sweatshop, like some other companies have been, and they are definitely using international data in the automotive sector, for instance, to enhance the model, but they're using low cost resource that are based on the continent. So there's a gap
So
here.
one is that there's enough talent on the ground here to work on international data. So these talents are being developed here, and these talent could actually be used for local talent, but for the time being, they are being used for the thing. I will take you on that one, Celine, because the next webinar in September would be about talent, and we can spend a lot of time on talking about talent, and we'll reach out to you so that you can, we can bring some insight for that.
Great. I can get a couple of more people around the table also.
That would be great. That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. Okay, good. So we continue, and if there's any input, let's move on. So we have the data sets. We have 2 more questions, but we'll go much, much quicker now. So the ethical and the private public sector. But I think we've already discussed that in the various points about how data can be exchanged to various players. And then last but not the least, last question, is going to be about, operationalizing the privacy and the protection. So, and I think, Karim, that's raised to your first point and the point that Miles was also making, which is to say, we can have all the data that all the policies that we want. If we don't have a way and means to enforce them and put them into practice, it's useless, right? So what is, maybe that'll be the last thought that we bring together. How do we think about enforcing the policies, the data protection policies or the data sovereignty policies that we might want to look at? What is it going to take to be able to enforce these policies if we decide to put them? Yeah, Karen, please go ahead.
Thanks, Anvel. I think this is going to be extremely challenging because, the way I would see this is, aside from a few governments that I see in Africa, there is a lacking of understanding of how this technology works, to number one. So to then setting up the legal framework around it on how to govern the data and how to make sure, it's not used for ill purposes is one thing, but enforcing it is another. And the mechanisms, the technologies required and the talent required to me, the way I see this is that it may require some sort of public-private partnership where private companies can help the governments in enforcing these laws, because it will require tools that already exist out there, but that we can also learn from other countries who are doing it. And like I mentioned at the very onset, China being the extreme, right, where they forbid complete export of any data that's derived from these models. So, I think it's going to be a very truly, a test of what are the best examples out there in terms of enforcing that. And it's going to require some learning from, case studies of how other countries have been doing it and ideally adapt it to, individual countries' environments to do this. But I think it's going to be a very big challenge because of the technicality and the talent required for this kind of enforcement.
Yeah, I think that's really where the challenge is, because you can get all the laws that you want, right? But especially for these, if you can't enforce it, then it's useless because people would be doing whatever they want to do. I'm going to open up for 1 minute. If there's anyone else in the audience who has not spoken yet and wants to give a view, you can raise your hand for a final comment and contribution. Okay, if none, I think Lei, you had your hands up. Please, maybe we will take the last comment for this. and then we will close the session for today. And I will ask you maybe to stay online. We just take, I think Tracy likes to take a final shot of the participant for the webinar. And then we will also engage post the webinar with the key takeaway. We will share the document with you, and then we can discuss about how best to leverage this document, this input, and to achieve, our objectives as a team. So, Lei, please go ahead for the last comment.
I believe a lot of data protection laws already exist in most African countries, and however way those data protection laws are localized. In terms of enforcement, it's obviously going to depend on the owners of the data as well, because there are various tiers. There's the government tier, there's the private sector, as I said earlier. But the key takeaway is to look at the structuring of the African ecosystem where data protection is concerned. There's still a lot to be done around data aggregation, and there's still a lot to be done around data provision. And when all those things are done, like now, if you have a lot of data providers whose business is just data, it's easier to regulate those data providers through various to various data protection laws. So we're still talking about an ecosystem that needs to be developed. So once it's developed, it's obviously when you start having major players in the same way banking regulations are applied to various regional banks, you can actually apply those laws to the regional data providers or data aggregators as they start to grow within the African ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think, Serge, you wanted to make a comment as well?
Oh, no, it was just the camera. I was just getting some help for that. But yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Good. Okay. Thank you, guys. I think, this was another rich and very rich debate for all of us. Serge, your camera is actually very strong, right? It's good.
Is it? Sorry.
Okay, guys. So we went through the process and we understand where we are. Looked at the importance of data and the importance of us controlling, as a continent, controlling part of the data, controlling our data destiny. So that's number one. We've spoken a lot about the governance that needs to be established to ensure the sovereignty of this data. We've spoken about the quality of the data and the fact that we need to be able to collect this data, and the digitization of the continent is going to be critical in collecting this data. We spoke about the value chain and the needs to have some aggregators who are actually good collectors of data and can enable that into the ecosystem for more effectiveness. And then last but not the least, we spoke about the importance of enforcing the regulation and the fact that no matter what we decide today, we might not have all the strength to enforce the regulation. And we need partnership in order to enforce this regulation. I think these are the key points that we discussed today, at least from my notes. I'm sure the AI that is working on following the meeting will make a better recap than I did. And when this is done, we'll share with everyone. And then we will engage with the following topic in the next session, which will be about talent. So I know everybody is passionate about talent. So I can't wait to have a very robust debate on talent. Celine, who just left, is managing the talent space, and I'm sure there will be more people coming in and presenting talent. The one thing that we have is that we have quality people in Africa. We have talent. We just don't know how to use them best. So that'll be a very interesting debate that we'll have. Okay. So on that note, Tracy, I will leave you the direction now, and we follow your orders.
Thank you. Can Serge make yourself vertical or no?
Can I? I'm on my phone, so
You are
Okay.
Let me
horizontal.
just go
So
up.
maybe you need to turn your phone.
Yeah,
Because
I'll just
we
turn.
horizontal now. Okay, nice.
And
Yeah. And the
yes.
other way. The other way. No,
The other way.
The
You're
other
now
way.
inverted. Yeah. Okay, one more.
One more.
One more.
Yes,
There you go.
excellent. Yes, we have
There
you
we
now.
go.
Okay.
Good. Do I have more people can turn on the camera before we take a picture? So if not, it's okay. Just look at the camera. Okay, we wait. Herman, can you? Okay, Audrey, yes. Marie, Stephanie, and Agar, if you can. Oh, thank you so much. All right, so look at the camera and smile. Hi. One more. I'm just gonna change the layout. Hold on, multi-speaker. Let's see what would be better. 1, 2, 3, cheers. And excellent. That should be it. Thank you so much for all the participation.
Thank you very much, guys. And we'll
Thank
get
you.
back together again. We won't have any session in August because I think everybody's going on leave, but we'll come back in September and we'll talk about talent in September. And this is very engaging. So thank you very much. And let's continue the movement. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
guys.
guys.
Everybody have a
Have a
great
great
weekend.
one.